Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome back to Journalistic Writing, and today we'll talk about editorial writing. If you remember, in our last class, we were talking about news writing, and we talked about what news is, the structure of news, and of course, do's and don'ts of it. In news writing, we set some parameters like what to call a news and what not. Of course, the concept of objectivity, or the question of objectivity, was actually under discussion, that news are going to be objective. They are not fabricated, or they are not created, or news is not an imaginary work of the reporter. It's based on very factual details, based on some truthful events occurring in this world, which are shared by the reporters through newspaper, TV, radio, internet, with, of course, the readers in different parts of the world. So objectivity is the biggest question actually in news writing. Some of you may stand up and say, excuse me, objectivity is not possible, frankly. How it's not possible? When they say, when out of two words you choose one word, then where is objectivity? The subjectivity is involved. I mean, when you are, dressing up your thoughts into different words, and doing this, of course, comes the question, what word to be used? Should it be literal or figurative? Should it be denotational or connotational? I mean to say, the word associations, and of course, words carry also along with. So, selecting words, choosing words to dress up your meanings, some people say, of course, kill, the objectivity, subjectivity is involved. Well, that's what actually the human factor is, frankly speaking. This is what I would say, like, in defense. This is what, like, when human beings are involved, of course, they are going to, like, choose language for their report actually to be delivered. Subjectivity, in a way, is very much has its role in it. So, what word should be for the news? Of course, then the word can be fairness. Objectivity can be put in parallel with fairness. I mean, okay, if subjectivity is there, then reporters, try their maximum to be fair and square about, to convey information, convey news, honestly, the way it is, it was present, as it is, facts and figures, conveyed through. So over there, like, there should not be any contamination, in the report, in the facts and figures, in the details of the report, reporters are not going to contaminate it. Quite contrary to this are, today's topic, which is editorial. This is not, frankly speaking, objective writing. I mean, this is totally subjective writing. See, the name of editorial actually is what? This is opinion writing. It's not factual writing, actually. This is opinion. Facts are somewhere, and then you reinterpret, you reword, you recommunicate those facts through your own perception. I mean, see, facts and figures are around us, but I can take those, those facts and figures of those news differently. You can take differently, I can choose the darker side, you can choose the brighter side. So, opinion writing is actually totally the work of different people who do what, who view the things the way, they feel like, or you can say, when they mix the truth with their own ideology, when they mix the facts with their own ideology, when they mix the facts with their own perception, there, like, becomes that opinion. The same, I mean, the baseline, what I'm trying to say is, the baseline of editorial is also a piece of news. let's say yesterday there was an event, or there was a news reported in newspaper, and today what you see, the same news has been expressed again in the form of an editorial, or in the form of, let's say, a column, or in the form of, let's say, a feature in certain cases. So what actually is this? This is what we call, like, now the reinterpretation of the same facts and figures of the same news through the viewpoints of different people. I mean, same news, which is factual news, reported by ABC newspaper, reported by XYZ newspaper. Tomorrow, the both, newspapers, let's say these newspapers are left and right newspapers. The same left and right newspapers write editorials on these pieces of news. What happens? Of course, both are going to choose very different aspects of, and both are going to lead their readers toward probably different directions. So this is how we say objectivity mixed with subjectivity, and this is what actually editorial is. Editorial is a mixture of objectivity from the news point of view, and subjectivity from this essay point of view. Now, from here, I would take you towards, let's say, the definition of editorial. Very frankly, editorial is what? Look, newspaper is the voice of the community, some special group of people, voice of mine and yours, whereas editorial is the voice of the newspaper. Look what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say newspaper is a platform which I and you can use, where stories about me, stories about you, can take space and place, whereas editorial is the voice of the newspaper. What I'm trying to say is, editorial is an article which states the views and ideas of the newspaper on some special or specific issue. So newspaper, this editorial thing is actually then printed in the form of an opinion. Editorials, they are meant to influence public opinions. Their job is to influence people. Their job is to make opinion of the people. Since that's opinionated article, that's not factual details actually. Yeah, based on factual details, but the role is actually to lend perception to people, to make people how they should read that news and understand that, to interfere in the meanings in the mind of the people which they created by reading that particular story. What they're doing is, they are giving direction actually to that, flow of information in the people's mind. So they influence public opinion. Through editorial, newspapers can lead their readers. Of course, news leads readers to global truths. Something happens somewhere. What happens? Reporters convey that. The truth is shared actually. Different newspapers, report the same event differently, though, but truth is shared, objectivity and fairness is shared. But in editorials, what happens? The public opinion is actually made. People are actually given some ideology. People are given actually some perceptions. People are given actually some goggles to see the same truth, which reporters shared. So this is how, editorials are meant to influence public opinion, number one. Number two, they promote critical thinking. And number, three, after this critical thinking, they also cause, let's say, an action. I mean, they can make people, take on an action on some specific issue. So this is what actually is the functionality of an editorial. So editorial, very frankly speaking, is an opinionated article. According to Webster's dictionary, the meanings of editorial is what? That editorial is an article in a publication which expresses the views of the publisher or editors. This is what actually we can define editorial. Now look here, newspaper is not, we are constantly again and again talking about, voice of newspaper, views of newspaper, ideas of newspaper. Well, newspaper is not a living, breathing, human being, but editorial board is composed of course, or made of course, living and breathing human beings. Now, the editorial board actually, of course, consists of the top, I would say, senior editors. Now, these editors, they sit together, of course, and then they decide, of course, through a consensus, that what opinion is going to be published or printed as editorial tomorrow in the newspaper. If they come in conflict, of course, when human beings collaborate with each other, of course, conflict is very much there. But conflict is a positive virtue, actually. You know why? Because they take people ahead. So they sit together and they brainstorm, they share their ideas, and finally, they decide what opinion actually will be the opinion of the newspaper and will, of course, move tomorrow in the newspaper. Let's see where editorials are printed in the newspaper. If you remember, in one class, we talked about, parts of newspaper. We talked about the main page. We talked about inside pages where we print less important news like national news, international news. We talked about editorial page also. Yes, editorial page is called, why? Because it has got editorial, On your screen, I have shown you one editorial page. You can see the one which is in red ink highlighted. This one is actually editorial. And right above the editorial is the masthead. We discussed, of course, in that, class in parts of, newspaper when we were talking about, editorial page just does not have only editorial. It has many things, like it has editorial, number one. It has opinion articles also. It can have columns as well. It can have editorial cartoon also. It can have letters to editors as well. Sometime in some newspapers, editorial page is not just one. It's, let's say, two, Editorial can consist of, let's say, 2 pages. If editorial, page is not one, there are 2, for example, then the page on which editorial is not printed, the other page, the second page, which is also editorial page, that's called opposite editorial page. If there is any opposite editorial page, then, letters to editors, of course, will be, printed onto that, opposite page. And on the main editorial page, there will be articles, opinion articles. There can be, column. And most importantly, 1, 2, or 3 editorials. What is this? 1, 2, or 3 editorials? Look, first of all, on editorial page, there is printed actually the name of the newspaper, plus some important other publication information. This is called masthead. Now, editorial, now I'm going to call it, with your permission, essay. Look, editorial is an essay also. I'll discuss with you why we call it an essay. Why news article we cannot call an essay. News is not an essay actually, But editorial we can call, of course, an essay. I'll explain you. But under the masthead, the very first essay, the very first piece of writing, which I'm calling editorial, is, of course, the main editorial. If there is any more piece under editorial, that, of course, is not the main editorial. We call it editorial note. So, it's possible that on editorial page, there is one editorial, main, right under the masthead. If there is one more under the main editorial, that would be editorial note. And there can be 2, there can be 3. So this is how, that stuff is all about. Now, I said editorial is an essay also. If you remember, we talked about, the different types of writing styles. We talked about narrative writing, descriptive writing, and we talked about, expository writing also. Very frankly speaking, editorial is expository writing in larger cases. What is expository writing? To refresh your memory, expository writing is argumentative writing. argumentative writing, where you have, let's say, two sides, side A and side B, and what you do actually, you argue to tell people that which side has more weight, or you tell people that which side outweighs which side, or in expository writing, you tell which side you support more, or you tell which side has more numbers, or you can also tell that both sides are equally important. This is exposed exactly the same way. This editorial writing is also expository writing, in which, you bring in an issue, and of course, all issues have, generally speaking, two sides. The way we say, like two sides of the coin, the same way. Now, these newspaper people, they choose one side. I mean, of course, if there is one, you can say, very important, issue going on these days, and newspapers are writing follow-ups on that important issue, and then editorials are being written on that. Different newspapers, they'll be, if there are two sides of that issue, let's say A and B side, different newspapers, of course, will be choosing different sides. Some will be supporting A side, some will be supporting B sides. Some will be going for, or some will be going against, that thing. This is what actually perception is. This is what ideology of the newspapers, is. Therefore, sides you are going to support, and then, of course, you are going to argue that why, let's say ABC newspaper, says that, side A of so-and-so issue is important, then he's going to, of course, write arguments, to support that why A side is more important, why A side is the right side, why so-and-so side is the brighter side, and so-and-so side is the darker side. So you're going to give, arguments in the favor of. Then, of course, after this, good writing is the one. In expository writing, we also studied that strong arguments are the one, of course, which you discuss, through which you discuss the both sides actually. Not only side A, which you support, but also side B, which you refute. Exactly the same way in editorials also. After, discussing the issue, then discussing, giving arguments in the favor of that issue, favorable arguments in the about the favorable side actually. Then, of course, we discuss the other side of the issue also. And, of course, we tell, why that side is not favorable, why we are refuting that. Then, of course, you close it. This is how, editorials are written. And this is how expository writing goes. And that's why, like I said, as this editorial writing is also like, I'm not saying exactly, but of course, like, essay writing. Let's go ahead now, what editorials actually do. Well, there are, different, you can say, purposes or different functions, editorials perform. Very important function, and that is editorials are written to criticize or attack. This criticism, which we usually see in editorials is, fundamentally speaking, principally speaking, is not criticism for the sake of criticism. Healthy criticism, actually. Like we say, this press, in the press, let's say newspapers, they are sort of like, there are different monetary bodies, like, let's say, on the government officials, they are like, constantly watching their functions, see? And they are, of course, criticizing, and they are, of course, like, endorsing their function. If they do good, of course, they support them. If they do bad, they like, exactly the same way. Editorial is also sort of a monetary body. When government, does good function, of course, they come and they praise it, But if they, like, do something wrong, or they go against the national interests, for example, they stand up and they, like, give voice, give, of course, words that, something is going on the wrong side. So editorials function, first of all, very important function is that they criticize and they, of course, attack. But they criticize for healthy reasons. They criticize for constructive reasons. This is not criticism for the sake of criticism. And they do not criticize people. They criticize issues. This is something important. I mean to say, this is this is the way, like, we once discussed argument fallacies, that if your arguments are personal or personalized, they engage or they involve people and they overlook issues, then those arguments are useless. So editorials, in editorials, our arguments do not criticize people, actually. They criticize their actions. They are not going to say that so-and-so person is bad. Yes, they will, of course, focus that person's action and say that action of that person is bad. So this approach, actually, of course, we usually adopt. Constructive criticism and no personal attack, of course, people, do. Second one is, they defend, like they stand up for an individual or an institution that is under attack by society. So this is another, like, role of editorials. Then, endorse. Editorials also endorse. They support, the policies of the people, the policies of the organizations, for example, actions, good actions of the people of that community. They, of course, stand up and they endorse and they give them this message that, yes, we are, of course, with them. Then comes, compliment. They do praise, and then they investigate, advocate, or appeal. They investigate matters which are hidden from people, actually. So what they do is, actually, they explore, they dig facts out and present, before people. This is how they, they bring out reality for the people. So they, of course, investigate and they advocate also, and they appeal as well. I mean, if you remember, during the time, when in the Kashmir side, actually, in the NWFP side, of our country, there was an earthquake. See, in that time, editorials, every day, I would say, for many weeks, actually, editorials were written full of appeal for the people, full of praise for the people that stand up, go and help them. And of course, this sort of editorials, of course, do come in the time of crisis in newspapers. Then, of course, in rare cases, editorials are written to entertain also, and they are written to predict. Here I would like to quote one or share with you one very nice incident that I remember in, I would say, late 1980s, Yeltsin, actually, that time, like, Russian, of course, president, he, he went to inaugurate one drink, the Pepsi Cola, actually, in his country. Over there, he used argument fallacy. Like, if you remember, we discussed argument fallacies, and there we talked about that, arguing this way, that A is good. If A is good, then B is also good. So he made a statement that drink Pepsi Cola, it's just like Coca-Cola. This statement he, made. Please keep in your mind, that was a time when this USSR was in difficulty. It was at the brink of collapse. I mean, the Cold War, in which, it was war of ideology, war of ideas, the West and the USSR side, like, of course, they were battling ideologically, of course. And the very next morning, all the newspapers, they wrote editorials, they wrote reports, and they predicted, actually, that that USSR is going to collapse. And the same thing, within 2-3 years, what happened in 1992, USSR collapsed and dismembered into, smaller states. Editorials also predict. Here, this is actually acceptance, that when you become weaker inside, what you do, you start accepting things through fallacies, argument fallacies, like, A is good, B is good. This is what actually something is penetrating in you, and you are not negating that. Rather, your all efforts are towards, finding out or searching of what? Actually, the rationals, the justifications, of that acceptance. So this very, very small incident for me or for you, this kind of statement is nothing. But for the eye of newspapers, for the eye of, editors, for example, This statement was extremely meaningful, and this how interpreted, this how they predicted that, so and so is gonna, collapse. So they do predict also, and the prediction is, of course, quite meaningful. G. Smith in 1997 talked about the power of editorials. And he raised actually a question. Through that question, in a way, he tried to highlight the power, the role, the function of editorials, in a country, in the life of a nation, in community, or for a group of people. His question was, is the role of a newspaper editorial too? And then he enlisted some points in a way, indirectly, like, of course, he talked about that this is what actually is the role of editorials. I would like to read it for you. He says, the role of a newspaper editorial is to act as a voice for the ruling class. Of course, some editorials do act as a voice. They do give voice, to the ruling class. They do favor, they do endorse, they do acclaim, they do laud their policies. Whatever they do, they say always yes. There are some. Depends, like, what ideology is, you are, of course, following. There can be, like, such newspapers which which would actually always stand miles away from, and they, of course, criticize. And, of course, they praise also if governments, like, they do good things. Then he says, advocate for the rights of individuals. Be strictly accurate. Bring down a government. Criticize government policies. Fight for the freedom of the press. Indicate preferred foreign policy directions. Nurture enlightened values. Preach. Set a high tone for debate. Suppress important facts. And promote critical thinking. So, of course, I very strongly believe, very strongly I would say that, yes, this is what actually is the part of editorial, if it's written the way it should be. Now, let's talk about the qualities of a good editorial. First of all, the same way, of course, editorial is what? In it, you have two things. You have ideas, plus you have language. So these two things, again, of course, will base on the same characteristics, of good writing, that editorial also, it should also be an example of good writing, that first of all, it should be clear, precise conveyance of ideas. Whatever, like, point, whatever idea you want to convey, make sure it's clear. Make sure there is no ambiguity in it. Make sure that people can easily understand so that, the purpose could be served. Second one is concreteness. Concreteness means, of course, make your ideas, make your facts and figures, which you quote in your editorial, very much specific, extremely narrowed down, They should not be generic in nature, frankly speaking. So use facts and figures which are correct and they are concrete, not general, and try to put action in your verbs and choose vivid image-building, words. The third one is economy. Economy means, of course, the brevity of your expression, the conciseness of your expression. Make every word count. Do not repeat. Don't use wordy expressions. Include only relevant examples, relevant statements in your editorial. Don't repeat much. Do not go for the circumlocution, okay, in your editorial. Make it, like, more compact. And this is how the economy of expression, of course, will be included. Because in argumentative writing, we are going to be very clear, we are going to be very concise, and we are going to be to the point so that people could really understand the actual, terse idea of ours. Next one is tone. Editorials, though they criticize, they attack, they find faults in everything they do, but they do it with a very positive tone. As I told you before, editorials criticize not for the sake of criticism, They criticize for healthy reasons, for constructive reasons. So try, and of course, all editorials should have a very positive tone, a very constructive, healthy tone. So this is how. And the tempo of editorial has to be, of course, very flowy. The fluency of your writing or fluency of editorial should be of wonderful quality. There should be a logical sequence and there should be a logical progression. Editorial should flow. It should not have a circular, presentation of ideas that you start repeating things. It should be rather in progressive in form, rather I would say prospective in form. You start from one point and then you feel as if you are being led towards, the wind up. So this is how the tempo should be extremely flowy. And the last thing is, of course, variety. Variety is the spice. Choose variety of words, choose variety of sentences, and vary sentence length and sentence structure also. So these are 6 important, qualities of editorials. Next comes types of editorials. We have 4 major types of editorials. Number 1, we have editorials which explain or interpret. Number 2, we have editorials which criticize. Number 3, editorials which persuade, and number 4, editorials which, praise. These are 4 basic types of editorials. The first I said editorials which explain or interpret. Of course, if editorial or if the newspaper has adopted, has chosen some stance on some controversial issue, for example, so it will be the responsibility of the newspaper. Look, how newspaper speaks with the people. Newspaper does not speak with the people through reports. Report is what? Report is actually presentation of facts and figures, presentation of truth. So newspaper does not speak with the readers through news. There is only one door, there is only one window from where newspaper can speak with the readers, and that window, that place and that platform actually is the editorial. From editorial, newspaper can explain the people that why they chose this stance, why they, chose so-and-so side of the issue, of that controversial issue. So they, of course, describe and they do interpret their policies and their procedures, of course. And then, most important function, as I told you before, such editorials, which criticize. Of course, editorials which criticize government policies, which criticize, let's say, if there are some NGOs working, so editorials can have an eye on the function of those NGOs. And of course, they can also criticize the cumulative, function of the whole nation also. So they can, have a role of sort of a monetary body, on all different pillars, I would say, of a nation or of a country. And the last one, of course, is a praise. The editorials are written, of course, to praise also. The excellent example, of course, is the time of earthquake in Pakistan, where people, they came out like anything and they supported, those dying and those, people in difficult hours, difficult times, like anything. And, editorials, of course, they used, words of praise, and they, in the real sense of the word, lauded, the philanthropic, actually, function of this whole, nation. Let's go ahead now and talk about how editorials are written. I'll take you back towards the same, 6-step process of writing, in which, if for your, to refresh your memory, I would say, those 6 points were, the first one was invention. Invention was the point in which we invent or we select a topic on which we want to write. And the second step in the process is collection. In collection, what we do actually, we collect information from different sources. Number 3 was organization, and is actually organization, in which we, keeping the topic in mind, keeping the relevance in mind, we choose, select ideas which are primarily relevant and then secondarily relevant. And of course, then we organize, most important first, second most important second, and then third important third, and of course then the remaining points. Next one is, drafting, in which, we put those ideas into language, and then is, revising, and of course, proofreading. These are 6, steps of, writing process. Exactly the same way, the same writing process is of, editorial writing. Like the first one, invention. In invention stage, editorial board chooses an issue and sets an angle. Now, choosing an issue, of course, in the world of news, currency, novelty, and of course, impact, these are some very important characteristics, which always go with the news. And editorials are also written, of course, on, issues which are extremely latest. There are some, there are, of course, some, I would say, editorials which are written on historical, let's say, events. For example, if editorial is written on, 23rd of March, editorial about that, or 1947's, like, 14th of August, about that, if it's written, that's fine, different thing. But editorials are actually written on the latest, issues. Therefore, issue is going to be latest, which they're going to select actually through some, I would say, consensus. And then, angle is given to that issue. Like in our general expository writing, what we do actually, we select a topic, and then what we do actually, then we, find out, you can say, or you take it this way, we narrow down that topic. Why we narrow down that topic, so that, we could manage it effectively. Exactly the same way, editorial board first does what? Selects, chooses, an issue, number one. Number two, gives it an angle. Now, we have 4 angles. One angle is that you want to explain or interpret. No, explanation and interpretation is one angle. Second angle is, you want to criticize. That can be an angle. Or third angle, like, you want to, let's say, endorse, or you want to support, or you want to entertain. These are angles, which you're going to choose. Step number 2 of this writing process will be that, details are gathered. I mean, information is collected about that issue from different sources. Of course, we have 2 major sources. The first source is internal source. When, like, editorial writer or editorial board or the editors, they're going to sit together, they're going to brainstorm actually. Of course, you will be, there are different ways of brainstorming, like, you can probe. I mean, probing is one, you can ask yourself questions, what you know, and you can put down, that information. Listening is another thing, clustering is another thing. So this is how, like, you can use yourself as a source of information. So fundamental basic ideas, of course, going to come out from your mind. Then, of course, you have libraries are there, resource persons are there, your own, in your newspaper, your own reference section is there. You can go there and you can, collect data. So this is how you're going to collect information. In the third step, what you're going to do, in the third step, you're going to check the relevance of that material, the relevance of those ideas, and you're going to delete irrelevant ideas, and you're going to organize relevant one. Let's say, just, in news writing, what we do actually, we write climax first, and then, sportive details, and, closing next. In here, organization is totally different. Here, we first of all discuss issue, then we choose a side, we give argumentation, in the favor of that side. We discuss the contrast also, I mean, the other side of the issue. We tell, like, why that side is not favorable. And then, of course, we conclude. In the same manner, something to open, and then something to choose a side, and some arguments, to support that side, and some paragraph, to refute the other side, and something to, conclude that editorial. Exactly the same way. This is how, like, you put pieces of information in these, 4 or 5 compartments. What comes next? Comes next is now drafting stage. You are now going to write that editorial. I mean, ideas are in your mind, information is in front of you, and now, of course, you will be putting those ideas in that piece of, in that language, of course. And after, finishing your first draft, you are going to, next stage, of course, is get it right, which is revising. In revising, what you do, look, you revise, let's say, 3 things. Like, you are going to revise, most importantly, the content of that editorial. the facts and figures which you have used in that editorial, the names which you have used in that editorial. They should be correct actually. They should be spelled correct actually. And you are going to check this, that the facts and figures which you are using, they are not general in form or in fashion. They are specific in form and fashion. And then after doing this, which we call as the second draft, you rewrite your editorial. And last of all, what you do, you proofread. You proofread for language, you proofread for mechanics, you proofread, for spelling and all. So this is how, we write, generally speaking, an editorial. Now, a very typical, a very technical, like in the way in news writing we talked about, a very typical and technical structure of an editorial, exactly the same way, we do have some specialized, structure of editorials that we call as specs. Now, specs is what? S is a mnemonic word, actually. S means something, P means something. So let's discuss, what specs is. On your screen, you can see, in specs, S means situation. In the very first paragraph of your editorial, you're going to discuss the situation in very effective and meaningful manner. In other words, you are going to discuss this, write a few lines about that situation, which we also call as, the statement of the problem or problem statement, you're going to discuss in the first paragraph that so-and-so issue is there, and now I'm going to choose A of its side or B of this side, and then, of course, you're going to argue. First paragraph, then, is description of the situation or the problem statement. In the second paragraph, of course, now you can again see P stands for position on the problem. You have given, your situation, you have described it in most compact manner in the first paragraph. In the second paragraph, now you will give your position, that you want to support it or you want to refute it, for example. You want to endorse it, you want to refute it, or you want to, let's say, choose a third stance, neither A side nor B side, a third stance, for example, you want to choose. That's also possible. So you give your position. The position of your newspaper on that controversial issue comes in the second paragraph. Now, third paragraph, now out of specs, S for situation, P for your position, E for evidence now. You have now given your position. In the third paragraph, you will give evidence now. What evidence you have? Argumentation, actually. Facts and figures, actually. Quotes also possible, but keep them, short and limited in number. That you can give. You can support your position, but please keep in mind, apply the studies, which we did actually towards argument fallacies, that don't use such arguments, which actually are not arguments. They are fallacies in the real sense. So it's an expository writing, you are trying to persuade your readers to try to use rhetorical devices so that, you could really persuade and influence, and change, people's stance and point of view, or at least you can lend them, some perception or some, viewpoint towards. And next comes in specs S, P, E for evidence, and then comes C for contrast. Now, in the fourth paragraph, you are going to discuss the other side of the coin, or you can say the other side of the issue. Now, that side you will discuss and you will refute. Now, look here, if you start discussing the both sides, then what's your stance? You give situation in the first paragraph. Now, in the second paragraph, you give your position. In the third paragraph, you are giving pieces of evidence, argumentation in the favor of that position. In the fourth paragraph, you are going to discuss the other side of the coin and you will refute. You will give reason that why I'm against that very side. And then comes last, solution. Editorials are solution-oriented. They're not problem-oriented. Please keep in mind, this is something important. News reports, if there are problems, they convey problems. They do not give solution. If they give solution, then the news become, news will become, of course, subjective. Editorials are solution-oriented. I mean, they are discussing a problem, and then in the last paragraph, which is the fifth paragraph, they are going to give some solutions. Minimum 2 solutions should be there in that editorial. So this is what a typical specialized technical structure, or you can say organization of an editorial. In the first paragraph, discuss issue. In the second paragraph, take your position. In the third paragraph, support your position. In the fourth paragraph, refute the other side of the coin or refute the other side of the issue. And in the last paragraph, whatever position you have taken, whatever evidence you have given, in the light of all that stuff, give some solution. Minimum 2 solutions, should be there. This is how editorial, you finish. Let's go back towards a slide for you. There is one example of editorial, and I have labeled, 5 parts of this editorial. Like you can see the early part of this editorial, I labeled it as S. I mean, if you read this part of this editorial, that is all about situation or the problem. And then if you swim a little down in the lines, then I have labeled P also, that somewhere here you are going to find out the newspaper's position. And then the third in the same column I labeled as E. Here, the newspaper is giving evidence, I mean the argumentation, the favorable argumentation. In the second column of this editorial, and in the last paragraph of this editorial, you find C. Of course, C is the contrast. Contrast means the other side of the coin. And here, newspapers are going to discuss the second side of the controversial issue, and they're going to refute that. They're going to give reason why that's not favorable, that's not preferable. And in the last part of the last paragraph, I labeled as S. S is for the solution. So this is how this editorial, which is on your screen, have been sliced out, have been divided in terms of 5 different parts, 5 different portions also. You can also, just pick up any newspaper and, go to the editorial, and over there, read it out and ask yourself, what's the first paragraph? Is it about the situation? The second paragraph, the third? Try to apply that, thing and see, that every time newspapers, follow the same structure, policy, or they vary it. Let's go ahead now, discuss the do's and don'ts, of editorial. What rules you are going to follow, and what common errors, you are going to, avoid. On your screen, I have enlisted actually 20 do's. The first one is, change abstractions into living examples. Not just examples, your arguments also should be more realistic, less idealistic, should be more concrete, more specific, and less abstract. Number 2, a warm, positive tone is essential. Again, the same thing. If you are criticizing, you criticize not for the sake of criticism, for the sake of construction, actually. Third one, soften criticism. Never divide your readership. Number 4, speak as the voice of the whole community. Number 5, tie the editorial to a news item or current issue of public concern. Number 6, show a local flavor, local loyalties and interests related to, of course, readers. Number 7, beware legal challenges over reputations. This point is important. Try not to label bad or defame people without any proof or without any evidence. You got to be very careful about. Things are, of course, challengeable, of course, in the court. So try to, keep yourself away. And then comes avoid a preachy tone and rhetorical flourishes, and convert statistics into factions and simplify grammar and vocabulary. And then comes limit questions to a minimum. Don't ask questions in your editorial, rather give answers. And then comes clarify your point of view before beginning, state a headline. Do not go unless you clarify your point which you have made in editorial. Then is establish your authority, credibility, simplify expressions, talk plainly, focus on 3 points only. avoid language knots. Like, don't use such language knots like in which, to which, of which. Try to like avoid these. Avoid lists. In editorials, we do not go for the listing like firstly, secondly, thirdly, moreover, furthermore, what is more. We avoid like, these things. And then next comes avoid dialogues. Go for the dialogue. And most important, do not use I, the pronoun I actually, because it's written not by one person, it's written by the whole board actually, the editorial board. And that's why editorial is never with a byline. I mean, the editorial writer's name is never, with this essay. Finally, what are the don'ts of editorial writing? I mean, points which you should not do, or the common errors actually, like, what are, which you should keep yourself, away from. Let's take a look of this list. The singular pronoun I mean, don't use singular pronoun I. As you know, that editorial I told you before is not written by one person. Number two, falsehoods, suppositions, and exaggerations. No hyperbole you should try to wrongly convince or influence, your people. Keep yourself realistic. Third one is, libel and defamation. The same, like, legal bindings, be aware of it. Your points can be, of course, challenged. So keep yourself, do not defame people for no reason. And then, as advocate anything illegal. Don't advocate anything which is illegal. Do not write long paragraphs. Do not give subheadings. Do not use difficult technical words. And no grammatical knots, confused writing, questions with no possible answers, and forget to devise and include a headline. So these are like, some don'ts of editorial. Dear students, in this class, we talked about what editorial is. We talked about, editorial is the voice of, a newspaper, and it's written by an editorial board. It's not written by one person. That's why it appears, without a byline. And editorials are printed on editorial page or pages. It appears right under the masthead. If there are more than one editorial, then the first editorial is the main, and the second is called the editorial note. And then we talked about what are good editorials, what are the types of editorials. We talked about the technical structure of an editorial. And there we talked about 5 points. That in the first paragraph, you discuss the situation. In the second paragraph, you talk about, let's say, your stance, and then evidence, you support your stance, and then the contrast, you refute that, the other side of the coin, and then, of course, the solutions you give in the last paragraphs. And then, of course, I discussed with you some do's and don'ts of that. I believe you understood what editorial is, and I hope, like, you liked it. Take care of yourself. See you next time with a new topic. Take care. Once again, bye-bye.